Hi guys, my name's Barry and welcome back to the channel. I recently done the reviews for all the Underworld movies in the franchise, so I thought it would be fitting to do a final video on the ranking for the Underworld movies. And at number 5 is Underworld Blood Wars, and that's no surprise and no shock to those of you who have watched my reviews for these films. I just felt like this film was more lackluster than blockbuster. There was not a very coherent story that was connected to the previous films. It felt like the movie just really relied on who was available at the time, and they'll run with that with the story of the film, rehash some things that happened in previous films, but just give us different characters to do the same things that characters done previously. Marius, the bad guy in the film, was one of the worst, if not the worst, antagonist in the entire franchise as well. So the movie really had nothing going for it. And for it to be the last film of the franchise, it felt sad because it went out with a whimper, because the film started off really good. But hopefully, if they do an Underworld 6, they can redeem themselves from what they saw or what they did in Blood Wars. But by no means is Blood Wars a bad film. It's just an okay movie that I would watch again because there's some good elements to it. It's just not great. And then number 4 is Underworld Awakening, the 4th movie in the franchise. There's something about this film that seems just a little bit better than Blood Wars. Now, it's not much between them, but I think what I like about Awakening more than Blood Wars is it had better bad guys in it. It had a better final scene or final battle with the big massive Lycan at the end. So the antagonists in the film were a lot better than Blood Wars. Also, the story was a little bit more coherent, and they tried to introduce new characters at this point, so it's hard to do that in a franchise. But I think they've done that well with the introduction to David and his dad, etc., and the cops. So the introduction to the characters were a little bit better. The story was more coherent. A return for Kate Beckinsale as well maybe sold it for me too, because I wanted to see Kate Beckinsale again, and she was great as Selene, introducing a daughter. A little bit too far-fetched, but it was still acceptable at the time. So I think they tried to do something different. They tried to do something more than what we saw in Blood Wars. So because of that, I think it's better than Blood Wars. And then number 3 is Underworld, the first movie in the franchise. Now, I know that this will be some people's favourites, and I don't knock them for that, because I think the next 3 movies that I'm going to talk about are all great, and you could put any of them in any order and it would be acceptable. I just think Underworld being the longest movie in the franchise as well, it's about 133 minutes. It does drag at times, and I know that it's essential because it's the first movie. We need to get to know these characters, and we certainly do. One of the best parts about the film is the story and the character development. We get to know these people. We get to understand where both sides are coming from, because initially we're siding with the vampires because Selene is the main character. But as we get to know Lucian, we get to know the reasons why he's doing what he is doing. We get to side with the Lycans as well and find out what's happening with them. Are they the slaves? Is the vampires the bad guys? Ultimately, we still side with the vampires in this movie, mostly because of Selene, but we do get to feel both sides. So the story of Underworld was great, a great introduction to the franchise as well. And then number 2 is Underworld Rise of the Lycans. This is the prequel that nobody asked for, but when we got it, we accepted it because it was fantastic. This one sways more towards the Lycans. We feel for the Lycans in this one. The vampires are basically the bad guys. The Lycans are the good guys. And Michael Sheen's performance as Lucian was amazing. I loved him in Underworld 1, and I felt like there was something there that they could explore with him. And because he died at the end of it, I was like, we're not going to get to see now what Lucian could become. But I'm glad they went with the prequel, because we got to see Lucian again, albeit being a prequel. The story as well, even though we know what happens, we got a little mini segment of that full story in the first Underworld movie. I loved it. I just think that when you know something's going to happen, sometimes it can be a bad thing, because you're like, we knew that was going to happen anyway. But even though we knew what was going to happen in the prequel, the build up to it was great, because you really felt for Lucian. You felt like he needs to get revenge for what happened. And then when you watch Underworld 1 again, after watching Rise of the Lycans, you get to appreciate the Lycans more. Even though initially they weren't going to be the good guys, we get to appreciate them more as good guys watching that again after watching Rise of the Lycans. And then number 1 is Underworld Evolution. Now, I didn't know this was going to be my number 1. I genuinely thought this was going to be number 3 at best, because I remember not loving this film. Maybe I was at the time comparing it to the first one, and me loving the first one at the time, I thought nothing can beat the first movie. But after watching all 5 in a row, I thought, do you know what? Evolution is the best one in the franchise. I felt like it had the best story, a great continuation of the story of the first one, and it really cemented that Romeo and Juliet saga where a vampire can't go with a Lycan, a Lycan can't go with a vampire. But with the introduction to Marcus and William, the brothers, one being a vampire, one being a Lycan, them trying to get both of them together and get everyone to be involved with each other, it's sort of like that love story, similar to the first one, but more actiony. I thought the practical effects were better, the CGI was better. Marcus, the bad guy, was a lot better than Victor. I absolutely loved Victor from the first movie, but I just think Marcus was scarier and more menacing with those wings. It seemed like he could do a lot more and he was a lot more powerful. And him having a father who was one of like the grandfathers or the beginning of the vampires was great. William being one of the very first Lycans as well. So we had a lot of more powerful beings in this movie with much more at stake. And I loved the final fight between Michael, William, Marcus and Selene. It was fantastic. So that's it, guys. Short and sweet. Underworld Evolution being the best one in the franchise for me, and Blood Wars being the worst one in the franchise for me. There's no terrible movie in this franchise. I think the worst one, Blood Wars, is a serviceable film to see. Awakening is a good film, but the rest of them are great. So it was quite hard to determine if it was going to be Rise of the Lycans, the original, or Evolution being at number 1 spot. That's how close it was for me. But what about you guys? What is your ranking of the Underworld franchise? Leave your list down below. Let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you soon.
Meeting adjourned.
I'll be right back.
What are you waiting for, huh?
Coming to get you, Barbara.
Ever played Skin the Cat?
Someone's in the back!